Okay, fantastic. Hi, Orly. How are you?
Very good, Yoav. Pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you for making the time. It's been a bit of a challenge with your hectic schedule making this happen. I'm really grateful that you pushed through and we didn't give it up. So I'll jump directly to the topic of you representing Australia and everything revolving around AI standards. We met at the beginning of SC42 back in when everything started to move in the right direction of building international AI standards. So obviously, I'm super happy that we're getting to do this as a succession to the series so far with the previous episodes. And now doing this with you as a portal to Australia, understanding better how it works around AI, governance, ethics, standards, legislation is an amazing opportunity. So that's the last time I'm going to say thank you. And here I give you the mic to talk a little bit about yourself before standards, before SC42, before everything. Just maybe a few words about yourself and how you got to do what you're doing today. I think that's also super interesting.
For sure. It's been a while since 2018. Like we went on a bit of a journey, right? We have, I think,
Yes.
over 53 countries that are involved in the ISO standards. So pretty much part of the largest initiative, global initiative on AI. So it's gone a long way. Yes,
Indeed.
coming back to
Indeed.
beginnings. So I started my journey on AI started with algorithmic trading. I actually had the chance to get into as a lawyer in financial market at the right time, at the time of the global crash. And I was working for a Dutch financial services company, helping with the trading of algorithmic traders, so precursors of AI systems. So when doing that work, I was just going, and when we're speaking to the regulators globally about algorithmic trading and how to manage it, I thought, damn, it would have been really useful to have a best practice or some kind of guidance to be able to help us and guide us through. And that's how I fell in the world of standards. Like when AI came around, I was just going, damn, I really need this best practice and guidance to help me understand how to get the compliance rights, to have interoperability across markets. And I was introduced to the world of ISO by some colleagues and put the proposal for Australia to participate in the international standard on AI.
Amazing.
So I became the chair of the Mirror Committee. So that was the beginning of the journey.
Amazing. Very organic story. Very natural progression of things, having a problem and looking for a way to solve it. So thanks for sharing that personal take on how you got to do that. And obviously we've been sharing the road ever since. It seems like a long road, but it moved so fast that it seems like we only met yesterday. And taking a lead on what you just said on 2017, 18, I shared the feeling of looking for some guidance, looking for some instructions, best practices, experiences. There wasn't any back then. And a little jokingly, I can say that it seems like today we have a bit too much and we have to to do some ordering and picking of what is the way we want to, or how do we want to move forward. That touches a little bit maybe on the work done through OECD AI, led by Karin. We can maybe touch upon that later. But let's fill in the gaps between 2017, 18, and today. By the way, that when I came back from the inauguration of SC42, I was super excited because I came with in my mind, the gospel of, we found the solution of collaborating internationally, creating that guidance, creating that chair structure through consensus. And I went through R&D centers in Israel to spread the word that, this is coming and you should come and participate and join the effort. And I got very cynical responses of, when it comes in from corporate as some kind of an audit criteria that we have to adhere to, then, we'll be happy to have you around and talk to us then. So that was about 2018. And today, obviously, the sentiment is very different with startups, companies, multinationals. And I'll be happy to explore that angle of Australia is you have boots on the ground, working with companies, connecting to government and seeing the ecosystem. So with that long opening, sorry, it'd be great if you can walk us through what is Australia doing today in the world of AI in general, even before standards?
Yes, of course. So there's quite a lot happening right now in Australia in the world of AI, but let me set the scene first. So Australia actually started with, like every country, on AI ethics principles that were developed by CSIRO Data 61, which is national science organization for that's got the remit on responsible AI now. So they started with an ethics principle, and they have been developing some interesting research paper on responsible AI and the architecture that's needed, and patterns catalogs around AI and generative AI. So that work's been coming through, especially more and more through the last few years. Then we have also the National AI Center that's led by Stella Sola, who is effectively supporting the adoption of AI system and recently developing voluntary guidance for enterprise on AI. So that's different pieces. At the government level, the federal government appointed 12 experts as an interim group to advise on option for guardrails for high-risk AI systems. So I'm one of those experts. So you see there's more work done to help and support the organization take up AI and adopt AI and scale it responsibly, safely. And there's also, like in other country, a need to look at the change in the regulatory framework and considers a different option. Obviously, Australia is also looking at making sure the solutions that are developed are interoperable, which comes to my role in standards. As I say, as a lawyer, the appeal of standards is very much, I used to be a litigator too, so to not have to deal with different jurisdiction and have different requirements that are impossible to match. And so it makes more money for the lawyers, the litigation lawyers. I like to be able to deploy and develop the technology. So that's why I found standards very helpful, as you say, and especially in a very noisy world where you have a different framework and different definition every day.
Yeah,
effectively. To have this kind of guidance that's supported by, as I say, more than 50 countries is really useful. And so I say, with Australia, there's been consultation about responsible AI that have been underway. So we're taking a very considered approach to what guardrails and what's responsible AI means. I'm also part of some initiative that's looking at effectively the legal frameworks and the uplift to the legal framework, because from my perspective and from the work we do at ISO, AI is mostly amplifying existing risk, right? It's just always an existing use case. So we don't see, sorry, my apology. Now I'm getting lots of.
It's fine. It's fine.
Turn that off.
Sure.
So what was I saying? Yes.
It's amplifying the risk.
Yes, it's amplifying the risk. And so far, I think we have to be careful with the word we use. It's not really creating new risk. It's a tool that's built in existing use case. So the risk of impersonification is increased with deepfakes. The risk of infringing IP is already existed, but it can be done with AI, and we didn't look at different controls. So that's why, again, as I say, always coming back to the standards world where you agree on common definition and common approach. So I'm still excited about getting consensus on what 50 countries do agree on when you look at guidance.
And 50 countries obviously sometimes interpret even wording in different ways. So it is challenging, and to say the other side of the coin, that it is very reassuring when we do have that consensus that we can move forward from. And obviously that's the work we've been sharing through SC42. Again, that's the AI International Standardization Committee under ISO and IC, JTC1, to those of you who don't know what SC42 means. And just a quick question touching upon the setting the scene that you just gave us, which is amazing. National AI Center. So that would be just one national AI center to rule them all in a sense, or do you have some subsection or another abstraction layer of smaller research centers inside university working under that national? I'm asking because it's interesting to compare. In Israel, we don't have a national AI center per se. We don't have a national AI directorate. We do have budgeting that went towards creating 7 different research centers inside universities already established in Israel, drawing from their strength. And obviously government is involved in supporting research, but there's no one unified national AI center. So there's not even one, let's say, research viewpoint on taking AI ethics, governance, trustworthiness, safety in a let's say concise manner. So it's interesting to see what's going on in Australia.
So the National AI Center currently is under the umbrella of CSIRO Data 61. There's some changes that are happening right now, so the structure will change. But it operated under the National Science Agency. So that's been very helpful that way in making sure it's got that national approach. And I think just recently there was an announcement to have some adapt centers that will help promoting innovation. So there'll be a bit of diversification. I can't really talk to how what's the coordination mechanism, because effectively this is changing, was announced just this year. So
that's an amazing overview to just understand the inner workings of who's doing what in general terms, having CSIRO 61 and the National AI Center. They're both supported by the National Science Agency. And then I think your very important bridge was a lawyer and having that litigator experience, but also a standardization practitioner and expert, connecting the dots. You said you're trying to level up standardization work that's under consensus to see how that can support legislation. So I think that's a very interesting key topic to explore.
Yes, and sorry, Yoav, I should have mentioned, we also, in Australia, we also had the Australian Human Rights Commission that was also taking, since the beginning, since 2018, they very much got involved in what is responsible, how development with human rights. And we've also got, I should mention, the e-safety commissioner, that's obviously in Australia, take on new powers and looking at effectively online safety. So these are all different pieces that plays in Australia.
Oh, that's super important. Thank you for clarifying that. It seems from the way you're describing, they're integrated in the work, and it's not like there's some work being done and they're just responding to it.
So we have, yes, we have pretty much all those the National AI Centers that's really helping organizations scale AI with the research piece that's done by CSIRO, and it's got the agenda of responsible AI. And separately from this, I think we have some current changes where the e-safety commissioner is, so this is separate but related pieces. So the e-safety commissioner is looking at online safety. So obviously a number of AI piece comes into play here as the e-safety commissioner is getting new powers and is looking at specific challenges. Mm-hmm. And so that's one aspect. There's, I guess, like everywhere around the world, you have some different considerations. So e-safety is one, like the update to the privacy and human rights has been also some of the consideration that comes up very upfront in Australia, obviously.
Amazing. I have to add to the viewers who are not that well versed in standardization world, let alone the link to regulation, that Standardization Australia has a very good reputation in the world of standards in general, and in particular in their contribution also now to standards of AI. You're an envy to Standardization Israel, I have to say openly, in a good sense. So we do have a lot to learn from how you're doing. You just issued out a fantastic document about AI management system AIMS 42001 and how that can help more trustworthy, safe AI in organization in Australia. So we can even maybe talk about that and how you think that can help businesses in adopting those frameworks. And just so you know, that inspired SII, and we're now currently working on a similar version in Hebrew to that document just to help businesses locally. So thank you for that effort and leading the way. And I think that ties in a little bit later on as a point for continuation, just so I don't forget, is what you mentioned as lifting up standards to legislation. So talking about your efforts in standards in the local ecosystem with companies, micro SME startups, enterprises, and also about the link to legislation, which obviously relates to the AI Act now. So that could be interesting.
Yes, that's many different points. So
sorry, so let's start with the standards for businesses.
Yes. So I think with AIMS, so we have the first standards that provide the pathway for certification and as I said, Standard Australia provided an excellent paper providing an overview on what is 40-2001 and providing training on 40-2001, because from the Standard Australia Committee, our perspective is we are looking to shape the standards internationally. So because AI is effectively an international technology, so we very much focus on shaping it at ISO so that we can bring it back in Australia and it suits the Australian perspective rather than amend it after the fact if we can. And we've done that for 40-2001. So we had what's called an identical adoption of 40-2001. So from that perspective, we started to effectively, with Standard Australia, do that course. So there's a training course on 40-2001 that's provided. There's a number of paper also through the National AI Centre. Effectively, Standard Australia is part of what's called the Responsible AI Network, a network of organizations that promote responsible AI. And as part of this initiative, there's a number of workshops and series explaining standards and especially 40-2001. A few of my colleagues and myself have been delving into the intricacies of that standard.
Amazing. So we're not there yet in Israel. We're trying to I'm currently helping SII develop the certification process so that the companies can be audited in Hebrew in Israel. And it's something that I view as not a one-time project. I think it's a living, breathing experience, and you learn more from every organization that comes in through the funnel. because obviously every vertical is different and every size of organization influences the way you implement aims. And that's, again, only the organizational canvas to start from, right? That's kind of a necessity, but it's not enough in some cases.
Absolutely, and obviously we're still waiting on one standards to finalize to be able to fully certify it. So at the moment, it's very much that guidance and understanding of the different concepts that we putting forward. And I have to say, we very much like Israel, right? So we're a small delegation, so that's why we work very closely. Always a pleasure to meet you in different places. And we really try to put our effort on specific standards that matters, because as a small delegation, you want to have the most impact. So that's how we've proceeded to date. I'd like to think it's been quite successful.
Most definitely, yes. Yes, I have to say, we're in a place, as I'm speaking in the name of Israel at the moment, spearheading the work ever since inauguration, that Australia is really a lighthouse that we look to for inspiration on how to do things. Because again, SII is not positioned the same way you described Australian standards relative to other efforts going on with the National AI Center and CSIRO. And you mentioned, for example, academic work done to support the effort. So we don't have that. So obviously when we both share the stage in SC42, then I sit usually next to Ireland, and one of the key prominent representative for that country is a professor in a position in the university who's passionate about standards, who's doing work that's related. And we don't have that so much in Israel. People have a bad connotation in their minds when they're thinking about standards for some reason. And a lot of the people don't really know the standards for IT, everything relating to JTC1. Sometimes they mix it with, pacifier standards or standards for the babysit in the car. And obviously those are important standards, but it's a different realm of standards development type of experts that are in the room. And again, what Australia is doing, bringing different stakeholders to the standardization effort, is admirable. And I wish, Israel would follow suit that route. So kudos to you for all the work that you're spearheading for Australia. And with that, yeah, sure, go ahead.
And I think, it's been a more of an evolution. I think back in, even myself in 2016, I didn't know about standards, like even though they're used every day. So I had a strong learning curve. And I think organization to this invisible thread that links everything. So they're an excellent mechanism for consensus and interoperability, for international consensus and interoperability. So, but they often less known about. I think with the EU AI Act, as you say, the standards are really taken to a new level. We saw that with privacy, where we see more privacy practitioner using 27001 that's used in contract. So now, with AI, this is becoming, again, similar recognition. And again, at the very beginning, there was always this idea, I think, that standards were just technical. It was they were not socio-technical, so there was that assumption they will not cover governance. So we did a bit of education on this piece. And now, obviously, there's a really good understanding, I'd like to think, in Australia about the fact that through the standard we provide, we look at socio-technical system, and therefore look at not only the data piece, the models, but actually the governance that organization need to follow.
Amazing point. Building on top of that, just from a higher abstraction layer, I think that's part of the discussions that we had in an inauguration event of SC42, where the working groups were not yet formed, and we were discussing, even Phil Winnebloom, then the head of JTC1, shared the room and the discussion about, will we do social technical, or will we just stick to framework for architectural structure of software and the data group? And there was that side of the room saying, it should be only technical, and there was the other side of the room saying, we need to deal with ethics, which is a big suitcase umbrella term to deconstruct and then try to solve through standards. And I think we went the right way going with AI trustworthiness, because we're not necessarily doing philosophical societal work around ethics per se, but more about the implementation of safety, trustworthiness, robustness of the tools that are being developed. So I'm really happy that the higher council then agreed upon creating working group 3, which is again called trustworthiness. And I think that set the tone for more expert work you see today. When you hear experts coming in, they're not talking necessarily about AI ethics generally, which could sometimes be very vague. They talk in very concrete terms of, again, the trustworthiness of the systems, the transparency, the repeatability of certain tests that you're doing along the way of development and deployment.
Yeah, I agree. It's much more comprehensive. I think that's maybe what we were looking for.
Yeah, maybe elaborated a little bit too much about the socio-technical. Sorry, went too far there.
And I think that's where maybe, I'm very glad that we went that way, because effectively it's also, to your point, it's not just ethics, but we have some excellent standards on risk management and governance. So when we look at those standards, it's not just technical expert. We actually are preaching, we're doing what we're preaching. It's a multidisciplinary approach. So I'll use the opportunity to do a bit of a shout out to some of my experts.
Sure.
So we have some great experts in the safety field. So I've got David Wharton, that's been leading the way on working group 3 and trustworthiness, looking at functional safety and to make the system safe. We've also got some lawyers, like, for example, Kobe Lyons, that's been absolutely essential in the development of AI impact assessment. She's got on-the-ground practice too, so that's been really helpful. And Australia has been leading on AI and sustainability. So I think Helen's received the latest standards awards on sustainability.
Harm's amazing. Yes, for sure. And I'm gonna take you up on it. If you're doing a shout out, I'm gonna tag everybody in the post when we issue this episode up in the air. So thank you for mentioning them. They are indeed leading in a beautiful, very professional way. And I've had the chance to meet some of them in other forums. So yeah, again, Australia is really leading in a good, positive way, which I look up to. And touching on a different point, beyond social technical, which you've mentioned, the EU AI Act, which now gave a new space for standards and regulation. I think obviously I delve a little bit more in depth to those topics separately, both the legislation and then the standardization with Sebastian, who is the head of the committee and JTC1 doing the development of those standards. But just to recap for people who maybe forgot or didn't hear those episodes, we have Article 40 under the legislation with the presumption of conformity. And that means that the Commission is now delegating the development of tailor-made standards developed in Senelec to adhere to the EU AI Act. So legislation 200,000 feet above the ground, then we have standards getting things onto the ground in a much less vague, maybe vague is not the right word to use, but more of the way Sebastian explains it of, this is what we need to do in the legislation part, and this is how we do it in the standardization part. So standardization is a tool used now by the legislator to make the legislation more accessible in a sense. And with that, I think it'd be super interesting to see how is Australia reacting to that amazing effort done by the EU. What do Australians in government, people, practitioners like yourself think about it? What are you planning to do, or maybe already are doing in the legislation, standardization tension?
So, our perspective, I'm really pleased that effectively we just became an observer to GTC 21. So we have the opportunity to attend those meetings and understand the work of that's done at Sensenelec and the work of ISO linked together. Obviously, there's a cooperation agreement between the two, and so far we've been working under the Vienna Agreement, which allow pretty much for standards developed, a common topic to be developed by both Sensenelec and ISO, and effectively ensure that we have a bridge between the standards. So that's been fantastic. And as I say, we could not make the meeting in Bath because it was a bit too soon before we got admitted. Actually, I'm wrong. Harm
was there. Yeah, just wanted to say that we discussed it when I was in Dublin, and you guys were still not there and getting into it. And then now I couldn't attend physically, but Harm was there representing. So I'm super excited that you guys are in. You're obviously one of the forces outside of the EU that are shaping the link between standards and regulation the right way. You know, Canada would be another. So I'm super excited. Tom was there with his delegation, and Harm was representing you guys from Australia. And that's a really tight effort that I enjoy having you experts also in the European realm. Let's call it like that.
Yes. So at the moment, let's say we're getting our training wheels on GTC 21, and we're hoping to, as we get to understand a bit more of the work, just to be able to do that bridge and be a positive contributor.
Yes, amazing. So that answers the question from a standards perspective, which is important. But I was let me try to rephrase it. What I'm actually interested in every country that I revisit with the standards regulation tension in a positive way, right, is how does the government view AI standards? Do they look at it something positive as a negligent effort on something on the side that's not related to legislation? And, you know, the traditional ministry will just, you know, issue out their own guidelines, and, you know, if the industry wants, they'll do standards or whatnot. Or is there another tone in the air more close to what the EU is doing?
So I can only generally comment on this. Like, standards can be taken up voluntary or from a mandatory perspective. So if
by a certain ministry, you mean? So a certain ministry, not necessarily for AI, can choose a standard and say that's the benchmark
yes,
that we expect.
So there's two ways you can use standards. Again, if I take 27001 as an example, it's been useful. So the organization asked for it in the procurement, as part of the procurement process. So that's the way to call it from a voluntary perspective. In some other way, it can actually be mandated. That's not been done for AI, nor for 27001. But that's always a possibility, and that's the way the EU is going. So at the moment, from a standards perspective, what we see is obviously we had, I've worked with the New South Wales government. We developed an AI assurance framework as part of this. You know, this was based on some of this was linked to the work of standards. So that's an example of how the work of standards feeds in to one framework that was developed for the state. So
interesting. So on that note, the government is somehow taking action or participating, supporting the standards work in SC42, in observing JTC 21, has not yet done something concrete, just like the EU did. But as you've mentioned, you're part of a 12 group of experts advising the government, and there are more human rights experts in that effort and other groups supporting an examination, we can call it like that, of the government in Australia, trying to better understand how to deal with AI legislation or governance.
So I can't comment really on what's happening in that group, but what I can say is interoperability.
But there is that group, and you're part of that group. We can say that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
awesome.
And interoperability is important, obviously, for a country like Australia. So that's where the work of standards is helpful. Like whether the government will follow the EU or any other approach, I can't comment on to that. For me, where the standards best practice, what's relevant, it's actually give you a baseline of what's accepted. So it gives you an idea of what's the elements that allow for interoperability. And after that, it's very much for organization or states to decide what they want to do with that knowledge. We actually did, as part of the APEC SOM last year, a session on how international standard like ISO can be helpful for APEC country to scale AI responsibly. And just on that point, explaining how effectively the standards give a baseline that can help inform APEC country and when they're actually drafting their AI policy or the AI, informing the AI considerations. So it's very much not about, my point of view, it's not about adopting ISO standards straight. It's very much about understanding the standards and see how they can help build the policy. So ISO standards are very much about building bridges to make sure we can actually scale the technology and avoid the frictions.
Agreed. I want to share with you my 2 cents around that. There's no hidden agenda behind my question about what the government's doing. So let me be more clear on why I'm asking that. I am making the argument for more than a year now that governments that have standardization experts and the standardization work integrated in the policy development have much mature deliverables, frameworks, guidance for their business ecosystem, which is obviously the goal, right? Everybody wants to nurture their ecosystem of startups and of let alone enterprise presence in the country. So everyone are looking to create some kind of guidance, but still promote innovation. And coming back to my point is if you view legislation as one vector and then standardization as a different vector, which sometimes happen and sometimes may be the case, with AI, it has to be integrated from the beginning. And so you have to have a construct from government acknowledging AI standards and taking them into consideration when you're building the policy. And there are countries where you can see that being implemented and you can see how the countries are a little bit up ahead. So I put Australia on an axis of, where you are, somewhere in the middle. So Israel would be a little bit to the back because SAI is positioned in a certain way relative to other government ministries. And we don't have let's say, the example of 12 experts group advising the government, and then standards representative who's also a lawyer, so he's bringing two sides of the bridge. And so again, that was the hidden agenda behind the question, but it's not really hidden. I'm talking about it very publicly for a long time now, which is why I was trying to understand how Australia is looking at it and thinking about it. Because from my perspective, again, just to conclude, is that Australia is more advanced than other countries in how you're taking action in standards, supporting standards, leading standards. If it's SE42, if it's observing through Sensenelec, other forums, epics, as you've mentioned, if people kind of gather from our conversation the different dots, Australia is doing a lot.
Thank you. Yes, I have to, again, a big wave to all the experts. They've done fantastic work. And I think, stepping a little bit from the side, we have a constitution that makes sure that we have representative from academia, industry, and government. So effectively, it really helps get the message across of how standards can be useful on how they can be built in the laws. As I said, the EU's got a very specific mechanism. They changed their laws for this a long time. Again, not stepping into that argument, but rather stepping out. Like, I'll just say, we can both agree from a legal perspective, when we write laws like black and letter law, it's hard to change. So from that perspective, standards offer one mechanism. There's other mechanism, but it offers one mechanism on how you allow flexibility and change a little bit more easily. So that's the way the EU's been doing it. What we've seen in Australia is, like, if the standards are good, the industry adopts it and it allows them to set that best practice. So, and obviously, once you have an industry practice that's recognized, that's where we go into what I'd call soft law and establishing precedent, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. So that's where they become useful as that base.
So you're describing a much more organic process of building it from the bottom up.
I think that's through the committee and the involvement of all the different industries. That's why we see the uptake. Again, it's back to having a need and having the challenge with that many different framework and enabling, trade, interoperability to allow the technology to grow and to scale. So standards does that very well. It allow you to have similar process that are applied across if they're not changed. So it gives you those bridges. And then it facilitates the procurement of the technology. So if it's of the right quality, then it's adopted by organization and can support their process and establish best practice. So yes, it's an organic growth towards being recognized as best practice, and then can be used to effectively articulate what's reasonable or not as part, let's say, of precedents.
Interesting. Okay, so 3 points to close up this super interesting conversation. One is that we didn't even touch about the geopolitics level of things, with legislation obviously working with standardization and getting a different interpretation in the US, EU, Canada, so China, with the Belt and Road Initiative and Gaiji. So there's a lot going on that we can maybe cover in a follow-up episode when things are maybe even more mature in Australia, and then things can connect better. So that's one thing. The other one is that we didn't touch about the OECD AI work, which I think I saw you as one of the experts there in the experts group. So maybe you want to say a few words about that. And the last one is that if we're doing a shout out, then I promise that I'll get it in writing from you to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody, and I'll tag everybody relevant from the Australian delegation and people doing the work so they can get recognized.
Thank you. That's always nice to have experts recognized for the hard, long hours and late hours.
late hours, yes.
So on the OECD, yes, I'm part of the AI risk and incidents groups. I've been looking at all the risk framework, and obviously, fascinating work. Again, my work is very much focused on what is interoperable, what's the common grounds, so that we can actually develop the technology without having to redo everything each time we change country. So that work, Karin's been leading that work. As you say, it's been a great process. I'll see if I might see you in Paris.
Yes, for sure. I'm coming. Yeah. So see you there.
Yes, but it's been fantastic work. And obviously with ISO, it's got a liaison with OECD. So the work I see is very complementary hand in hand.
Amazing. So I'll be super happy to see you there. I'm feeling compelled to fly. Although it's a very hectic week and I've had to forsake another opportunity in a different country, and there's the AI week happening in Tel Aviv University that time. But since I got the co-chair position with the AI Index Group, I thought it'd be not okay to not come in physically. So super happy to see you there, and I think thank you. And I think that also touches about kind of living an open option for a future episode with you is the international tension, and there where the OECDI comes in an abstraction layer above that, trying to again connect the dots that are maybe sometimes diverging.
Yes, and I think to finish on this, in such a fragmented ecosystem, what we want is more of those initiatives that build the bridge rather than less.
Amazing.
It's more working towards that goal. What are the common perspectives that we can build on?
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. What a great way to finish this fantastic conversation. Thank you again, Aurelie, for making the time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure
Thanks.
too. Always nice to exchange with you, Yoav.
Same here. It was fantastic. Thanks again.